I mean, we would normally think it's self-evident, but is it so self-evident? You gave me a good answer that there's certainly effectiveness in terms of quality of work, and that's true. We're going to see later that the stats support that. But we said things like it makes us feel good and makes people around us feel good, but what does that mean?
It means we want to feel alive, we want to feel connected to everything, we want to feel...
Okay. So you see, Chaim, how we're groping for metaphors? We want to, how we're groping for metaphors, we want to feel alive. We are alive, we are talking, we're breathing, okay? But we mean something when we say to be alive, we mean more than just to be alive, okay? And what is that? What's that quality that we're searching for?
To feel at one with everything, to be in the zone.
To be in the zone, okay. Happiness leads to the zone. Might be that concentration leads to the zone. I'm not convinced yet. Yes?
Maybe to feel that you're good enough.
It makes... Okay, somehow it makes you feel good enough. In whose eyes? Yours, theirs? And what does it mean to feel good enough? We're almost back to feel good.
Like a level playing field. No one's worse or
better. Okay. See, we're going to another metaphor, a level playing field. All these I completely concur with, but I'm just trying to grapple with concrete responses. Yes?
Maybe a feeling of self-worth.
Self-worth. Yes. Okay. Happiness leads to self-worth and self-esteem. What's that?
Higher.
Higher? You can do that with a parachute.
Producing positive hormones which make us healthier. Very important.
Happiness produces hormones, which then ends up at the question which I wanted to know, why we want to be happy. To be healthy. Happy correlates with health. That is a good piece of evidence. Yes?
I know you're focused on the moment on the meaning of happiness, but since you asked the question in terms of the word want,
yes,
Buddhists tell us that
we should want nothing.
We shouldn't want to be happy because the more we want it, the less we'll feel it.
Right, and fortunately, since I'm Jewish and not Buddhist, yes.
So why won't we be happy? If we're not happy, we can't propagate the species. If
you're not happy, you can't propagate the species. That may not necessarily always be the case. You think you put your foot into it? Yeah.
I think the fundamental difference for me is the difference between subsisting and literally being on this earth and breathing.
Okay.
And actually
living.
Really living. Yeah, living rather than subsisting.
It seems like that which we want to enunciate in words doesn't really exist, while there nevertheless exists an inner knowing. And the word inner knowing is far from being exact in its own right. Somehow through our formative childhood and development to adulthood, the word happiness assumed a certain commonality of meaning and intent. But when it comes to definition of it, we are rather poor. And the reason for that is, as Kabbalah and Hasidus explains, is that words are very poor medium for transmitting emotions. Words are much better mechanisms. Is everything okay over there? Words are much better mechanisms for the transmission of thought processes, intellect, mind. But words are very poor transmitters of emotion. The only words we can use and the poets use are analogies and metaphors and borrowed circumstantial terminologies, like I feel good, I feel up, I feel alive, right? Okay, so that's important to know, because in Hasidus we then have created, not for tonight, a whole language in terms of being able to communicate the nature analytically of emotions. And in our system, there are 7 basic emotions, each one made up of each other. So there are 49 shades of emotions that we can place onto a graph as a template and be able to understand people. We're not going to go there tonight to any great extent. But I wanted to just begin that way because we take for granted this word happiness. Okay? And the other aspect about happiness is a little bit Buddhist, as you've said. We do know that as we quest for happiness, it's most unlikely that we'll gain it. It's like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The closer you get to it, the further away it recedes. Happiness is a state of being. It's a summary word. It's not a verb, interestingly. So it's other things that we do in life that allow us to gain a state of happiness, even though we were trying to define it in some shape or form and weren't too good at it. Okay? All this by way of introduction. Now, happiness, according to Dr. Tal Shahar, a name that some of you might know, his main reputation is that he was able to secure the largest classes at Harvard University on record. Over 2,000 students came to each of his classes. He was the professor in the subject called happiness. Okay. Today he's back in Israel and he's lecturing at an institution over there. And he used an example of a burger to explain the nature of happiness. So, what do we have here? We have 4 archetypal burgers. I'm sure everyone would have probably had a taste of some of these. And let's have a look at what this is all about. Number 1 burger is a rather large burger, do you not agree? I'm not sure how you would get your teeth into it, but I'm sure everyone in the room would like to. Nevertheless, what we know about number 1 burger is that's pointing at a hedonist. Now, what's a hedonist? A hedonist, as some might pronounce, or a hedonist, is someone who wants happiness now, everything now. Okay? No aspect of future, right now. I want to have that whole burger, everything that's possible in it, I want to have it right now. That's the junk burger with the lot. So that's the first person. The second person is the guy involved in the rat race. People who are involved in the rat race do know how to practice delayed gratification. They're prepared to practice Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, day after day, week after week, climbing the ladder. They will hold back, they'll conserve their resources, they'll take their time in climbing success ladders and the like, and in so doing, they will also therefore be the veggie burger. They won't have it with the lot. They're prepared to hold back and have the poor burger because one day they're going to be able to have every day the big burger. Okay, that's involved in the rat race. One day you'll make it. All right. Then we have the nihilist. The nihilist simply says there's no such thing as happiness, it's all an illusion. They have usually had a rather poor childhood, they rather have given up on life, etc. And therefore they will have a real yucky burger because what does it mean anyway? All right, so that's the nihilist. And the fourth type of person in the quest of happiness is the happy person. Okay, which I know everyone in this room is. They will eat healthy, that you said, tasty burger, and they will enjoy the journey of that eating. They won't go over the top, and they won't deny themselves, nor will they say, well, I'm not going to allow myself till tomorrow when I can really afford life to be happy. Happy means I have to get my first $1 million. I want to be able to get presidency of the company or whatever it might be, and therefore I have to hold. No. They will just journey along having that quantum of happiness day after day. These are the 4 categories that Dr. Tal Shahar nominates in terms of happiness. So once again, the hedonist avoids pain, but has no thoughts of the future, seeks present pleasure. Again, the rat racer self-sacrifice, but he says or she says that self-sacrifice will allow me to be happy tomorrow. All right? And then we have the nihilist, given up on life, resigned to meaninglessness, and therefore will just ignore what burgers might give. And then the happy person, all right? The journey to a meaningful destination. Have a look what Charlie Brown says. And that's another typology. That's not part of Tal Shahara's analysis, but it's an interesting psychological insight. And there are a lot of people who actually do deny themselves happiness. They deny themselves happiness in terms of because they have guilt, and therefore that their particular kind of guilt prevents them from being happy. Many a Holocaust survivor displays that kind of denial of happiness. Then you've got the other person who is scared of happiness because it's out of their reach, and therefore they will not make an attempt because they'll be disappointed. There's all sorts of reasoning why a person might not wish to embark on a path of happiness. But again, we're not going to deal with that this particular evening. The benefits of happiness were quoted earlier by some people, and I really do advise you to read Professor Lyubomirsky's work. She's really done some of the best contemporary work analysing happy people and the nature of happiness. I've forgotten the name of her book. I'll try to recall it and share it with you. She says, studies show that happy individuals are successful across multiple life domains, including marriage, friendship, income, work performance, and health. We're not surprised because every one of us might have intuitively known this or through life's experience have known this. But nevertheless, the fact that today we need to have empirical evidence to demonstrate this tells us how lost we've become in understanding some basic qualities of life that history has been able to endow all people with. But in our confusing state of the world today, with the mass media projecting images and instructing us and confusing us and telling us contradictory pieces of evidence and the like, simple truths of life have evaded the current generation. And that's really unfortunate. So we have to relearn it. Okay, let's do a little exercise together. I want you to do a little quasi-meditative exercise. So just put your hands resting on your knees. Put everything out of your hand for a moment. And I always caution you not to be concerned. It will stay where you put it on the ground. Gravity ensures that, and I'm not going to levitate it. Okay, it's going to be there. And I want you to gently close your eyes. And just focus on your breath, which is an easy focus, breathing in through the nose and breathing out. And just become aware of the difference in temperature of the air entering the nasal passage and the air exiting from the nasal passage. Cooler air entering, warmer air exiting. And just stay focused on that temperature differential. And be aware how your body warms the air, and that's what you exhale. I'd like you to cast your mind back to a moment, to a time, in the not too distant past hopefully, where you felt really happy in a totally unburdened way. Take yourself back there and allow yourself to re-experience it. See if you can give that image color and sound And try to become aware, just by the way, what part of your body feels most prominent in that experience. Your body now, I mean. When you visualize, reenact, bring from the imagination that occasion, where does it reside in your body here in this room? But continue enjoying that past experience. Okay, gently come back into the room, open your eyes. By the way, I always ask everybody to make sure that their phone is on, not off, on. You've heard me say that before, no? It's obvious why. No? You've spent so much time researching your jingle, and I want to know more about you. And therefore, if you allow me to hear your jingle, I learn about you. And I watch all the people around who get very angry with you, and that tells me a lot about them also. So I really do encourage it. I think it's good. Okay. That's fine. That's good. That's good. I say that's a happy jingle. What do you think? I think that is a really happy jingle, right? Okay. Now I commend you. Good choice. Could someone tell me what part of their bodies seem to express?
Heart.
You're pointing over here, which is even more than the heart.
Yeah, okay, heart.
Any other? Anyone felt it in their big toe? No?
Too low down.
Any other part of the body?
Right in my head.
In your head?
All the way. Everywhere.
All the way?
Stomach.
Yes. Cheeks? Yes.
Depends what you've been doing.
You've been sitting listening to me, okay? So yes, it radiates from the heart, but the radiation from the heart, if it is a powerful moment of experience, will be felt by the whole body. And that radiation will be progressive, and thereby the whole self is involved. So when you see people truly joyful, you'll find that they're moving different parts of their bodies, and their eyes are flickering, and their color, their glow is coming on, etc., etc. And that's a wonderful thing to experience. Okay. The thing that a lot of people are confused about is whether happiness happens. Notice the similarity of the word, or whether it's a matter for us to initiate it. Is it circumstantial? Is it dependent on our surrounding circumstances? Or is it something that you and I can actualize through our own act of choice? So as you can guess, we can choose it. And this is very, very interesting, because this is counterintuitive to say that. In fact, again, Professor Lyubomirsky is the one who nominates this. 50% of happiness is, in a sense, seemingly predetermined by our genetics. They call that the set point. Another mere 10% is the result of surrounding circumstances, which is interesting, how small that in effect is. And 40% is a matter of our choice, what we actually intend, our kavanah. And that's rather interesting, because the next step and the next statement is that if we consciously, mindfully choose happiness, whatever those words mean, to choose happiness, it is able to overcome the set point of 50% and the 10% of circumstances, so we become 100% happy. If not, then it's a matter of what we call habit. And habit is not simply a word. Habit means that the way that the patterns of operation in our brains function continue to do so and reinforce over and over again without our intention whatsoever. Every one of us in the room has habits. Every one of us in the room therefore has patterns within the brain, the field of neuroplasticity. And what we do by reformulating that habit over and over again is reinforce that pattern. The act of choice can actually change the patterns in the head. And if we therefore actualize choice over and over again, the new neurotransmitic transmission within the brain, the groove of the brain as it's so called, can change. Now, this is something that we've actually learnt about in recent years, not so many years, in the last half a dozen years. And I told another audience here recently about how this has impacted occupational therapy and other forms of remedial therapies, especially people who have strokes, God forbid, that when someone has a minor stroke, a mini stroke, and perhaps an arm or a leg doesn't work as well as it should, what we used to do was try to compensate by allowing the person to learn how to use their good arm and their good leg in a better way to compensate. These days we don't do that. These days we take the good arm and the good leg and we strap it up so you can't use it at all, and make the person will, with an act of will, to try to activate those limbs that seem to be affected. And what we have found is that it accelerates the healing processes remarkably faster. There's a natural healing process that may or may not take place, but through the act of will, we're actually causing an alternative connection within the brain to that part of the body that has become disabled. Now that's very, very interesting, because it shows you the power of kavanah, the power of wanting, the power of willing ourselves into the way that we wish to be. Therefore, the act of will also impinges not only on our physical body, but on our emotional self, in ways that we're going to discuss. Fully 40% of happiness is determined by intentioned activity. You have the power. You have to activate the intention. And this is what we've been talking about, neuroplasticity. The results are thoughts become words, words become actions, repetition of actions become habits, habits become the nature of your character, and the nature of your character determines your destiny. Have a look at that connecting long statement and note that it begins with thoughts. And thoughts are probably the most difficult aspect to control. If I were to say to you, I'd like everyone in this room not to think about a white elephant. Right, okay. Obviously. But it is possible to displace thoughts. And I do this a lot in the therapeutic setting when people have negative ruminations on how to introduce thought slides to displace an existing thought, because Hashem created us in such an interesting way that we can't think of two things at once. So if I give you a choice, for example, and I say white elephant and black bear, you cannot think of them at the same time unless they're beside each other. But if I ask you to exclusively think of one and the other at the same time, you can't. But you can quickly oscillate between one and the other. And you can control that oscillation. In fact, you can choose to focus on one at the expense of the other. And that's what I mean by displacement. So you can actually break rumination of negative thoughts and things like that. But it's very important to know that it begins here and ends there. And there we want happiness to lie as a state of being. One of the people who spoke extensively about the quality and nature of happiness was Viktor Frankl. Now, you've heard me mention him many times over, and I'm sure all of you have read his book, Man's Search for Meaning, and if not, as I always say, you should. It's a very slim book, 120 pages or so, and you know that Viktor Frankl was a newly graduated psychiatrist at the outset of the Holocaust and was interned in concentration camps for a full 4-year period. And first miracle, he survived. And the second one, he was able to maintain a clinical posture throughout all those years observing. And he made some very major conclusions, drew conclusions from his experience, which led to the emergence of his field of therapy, which he called logotherapy, for which his colleagues at the University of Vienna roundly criticized him and almost booted him out of the university because they were highly Freudian. And really, his career was almost short-circuited at that time. Fortunately, it wasn't, for all sorts of reasons, and he was able to leave us a wonderful legacy. Now, if you and I were to go through this particular kind of experience, I know if I were to go through that kind of experience, I'm not sure that I would end up the way that my father and my mother did, who were survivors, or my wife's parents, who were survivors as well. I don't think I'd have that kind of fortitude to be able to go through life and bring children into being and to have a sense of hope and aspiration, let alone belief. Frankl was one of those who did. And this is what he said. A thought transfixed me. For the first time in my life, I saw the truth as it is set into song by so many poets, proclaimed as the final wisdom by so many thinkers. The truth that love is the ultimate and the highest goal to which man can aspire. Then I grasped the meaning of the greatest secret that human poetry and human thought and belief have to impart. The salvation of man is through love and in love. I understood how a man who has nothing left in this world may still know bliss, be it only for a brief moment, in the contemplation of his beloved. In a position of utter desolation, when a man cannot express himself in positive action, when his only achievement may consist in enduring his sufferings in the right way, an honorable way, in such a position, man can, through loving contemplation of the image he carries of his beloved, achieve fulfillment. Very powerful words. Because if someone goes through that kind of horrific experience and can come out with that kind of a conclusion, nevertheless, I think it's a major instruction on what human nature is all about. Somewhere the word love, therefore, becomes a very important subtext of the word happiness. And it's interesting that no one really mentioned that in the introductory questions that I asked. And yet I'm going to make the big statement that all happiness, all states of happiness, is underlain by some quality of love. Now let's test that a little bit, because you can possibly point to me experiences of happiness that don't seem to have ostensibly any connection to love. I mean, you can be very happy on a merry-go-round. You can be very happy in the cinema. You can be very happy under all sorts of different experiential conditions. To which I probably would respond and say, we probably have to distinguish experience from love, visceral experience from love. Just visceral experience, which allows the body in some ways to mimic some of the same properties that ultimate states of happiness also produce means that very often one is confused for the other. And that's why so many people quest the experience rather than the love as such. And that experience is a high, whether it's a hit with some drug or whether it is some moment of ecstasy that is in some way manufactured by an external stimulus in some shape or form, and that can become addictive, etc. That is not necessarily love at all. In fact, it's not love by any stretch of imagination. And yet love has some similar qualities to that. But in today's society, where love is in such short supply, the alternative substitute of having an experience in life, or as Chaim said, to make yourself feel alive, assumes artificial mechanisms to substitute for what we don't have by way of a true loving experience. So that's a very important point to note, which will help explain why many people do quest for the experiential rather than quest for the true love that Frankl is talking about. Any questions on that? Not everything that happens seems for the best, but you can make the best of everything. That, I think, sums up a lot of what Frankl said in that paragraph. I don't want you to do this exercise. I would do it on another occasion, and that would be to try to allow yourself to reenact in your mind and to re-experience a painful situation, but instead of giving it a negative, I want you to would have wanted to give a positive frame on it. But I haven't yet given that particular lecture on how to reframe your emotions from negative to positive, so we can't actually practice it as such. But reframing is a very important tool that everyone can utilize. What our eyes see is neither good or bad, positive or negative. It's what our mind interprets that creates that effect. And interpretation, you have a choice over. You can interpret something positively and interpret it negatively. Your choice. Someone yelling and screaming at you can be interpreted negatively. How dare they speak to me like that? Okay? Or it can be interpreted positively. Hashem placed me in this circumstance because obviously I have been chosen to be the best therapist for this person. Otherwise, I would not be being screamed at, would I? Okay? So you've got the capacity to reframe, and that capacity is for everything, even truly physically painful circumstances. You know full well that fear accentuates pain. If you become fearful of anticipation of pain, you will feel the pain subjectively much more powerfully. Some people will go to the dentist and have that filling, and they'll be awfully in pain. Another person will go and have exactly the same filling and be in the same circumstances and not feel it at all. And very often, that's not a question of the physiology, but the psychology. So, for example, we always tell parents before the child is taken for their first inoculations and vaccinations, sit your child down and explain to the child that the doctor's going to produce a needle. Don't be afraid, because in that needle are very good things that are going to enter your body and protect you from those nasty germs, right? And your child nods sagaciously and you say to yourself, what a machaya, what a wonderful child I've got. And then you take the child to the doctor. And the doctor produces the needle. And geschrei, the loudest yelling and screaming that you've ever heard before the needles even touch the body. And you wonder what happened to that wonderful tutorial that I gave to my child. Whereas, if you never gave that tutorial, And when the child was ready for the inoculation, you averted the child's eyes, distracted the child, and the needle would go in. There also would be a bit of a yelp, but nothing as dramatic as the previous circumstance I described. Why? Because people who are prepared for pain will feel the pain much more potently. And fear is a very major exaggerator of objective pain. So learning to reframe means to be able to negate the fear and to be able to place things in a positive spin. That's a very important point in terms of changing our attitudinal response to one that will produce happiness as opposed to the one that tends to produce despondency. Happiness is a journey. It's not a goal. It's not the rat race that one day I'll be happy. We always tell our children, right, you have to study, you have to really work hard, you have to get the grades, you have to get the marks. That'll get you into Melbourne University and Monash University, etc. They're the best ones. And then you'll be able to get your degree, and then you'll be able to work, and then. Okay? So what are we actually teaching the child? We're teaching the child that life is a fire bargain basement sale, that if you don't elbow your way to the front, someone else is going to get the product and you're going to be deprived. Now, you can imagine for 20 years of a person's life, that's their philosophy of life, they're very unlikely to be happy. Contrast that with the next little piece here. Some of you may have read Robert Pirsig's book in the late 60s, early 70s, Zen and the Art of Bicycle Repair, I think it was called. How many people are showing their age? Okay, all right. In that book, Robert Pirsig notes that he had joined a group of elderly monks, mountain climbing the Himalayas. He was by far the youngest, yet struggled, while the monks, who indeed were much older than him, succeeded effortlessly. He concluded that because he focused on the peak as the goal, the peak of the mountain, and was overwhelmed by what lay ahead of him, the monks, however, focused on the peak only to maintain their sense of bearing, but enjoyed the real goal, which was the journey itself. The wear and tear, the kind of energy that worry and concern takes up, removes it from the energy that can be utilized for states of happiness. And we have a given quantum of energy, and then we have to go to sleep and replenish it. So we have to be able to use it positively. If we're constantly focused on the goal itself as the be-all and end-all, it's very unlikely that you'll be happy because goals are rarely met. Why? Because goalposts change. And we start kicking the ball in another direction because we rediscover that goal which we originally thought is not really the goal that we need. We need to move it sideways here and there. And life is full of changing of goalposts. And that way madness lies. Therefore, what we need to do is concentrate on the journey. Every day is part of that journey. Every day we wake up in the morning with the Modeh Ani and we open our eyes and we say through the Modeh Ani, I wonder what today will bring that will provide me with my teaching for the day. Because every challenge is a teaching. Every seemingly pain is a teaching. Every opportunity is a teaching, and we grow. So today is one step on the journey. The goal, just to let us know which direction we're heading. That peak is there, so we have a sense of we're going that way and not that way. But the truth of happiness lies by enjoying the journey. Understood? These are not complex statements. These are almost simplistic in many respects, and yet we forget about that. We live today because of tomorrow, and we live tomorrow because of the next day. And we want to get to somewhere else. We don't want to be where we are. And yet, here where we are is exactly where Hashem places us for our own benefit and for our own good if we only opened our eyes and saw it as such. Journeys don't just happen. Just think about 2 settings that make you happy in your contemporary life. 2 situations which tend to make you happy with certain people, in certain circumstances. See if you can just call to mind 2 of those. And then, how much time per week do you set aside to make them happen? Be honest with yourself. Most happiness moments are attainable with the right frame of mind and with the wantingness to get there. But we forget. We don't diarise these. We diarise business appointments, hairdresser appointments, tailor appointments, appointments with our doctors, and more doctors, and more doctors. Okay? But we don't diarise, I must be happy 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, and I know exactly what makes me happy, and therefore I'm going to be true to that appointment. And because our lives are very much turbulent, we have to diarise them, or we forget. And a week passes, and a month passes, and 2 months pass, and 6 months pass, and on our deathbed we're lying there and we're saying to ourselves, we just didn't have the time. Not true. You had the time, you forgot. Simple as that. What does happiness mean? So it's almost our opening statement. Again, Dr. Tal Shahar says, it's the overall experience of pleasure and meaning. Well, I looked hard at that statement and thought about it long and often, and I'm not sure what he means. Okay? Although it's an attempt to grapple with it. So I'm going to give you now a model that's drawn from Hasidus explaining Kabbalah as to what happiness is. Stay with me. It's a little bit involved, but then we as human beings tend to be a little bit involved. So, to reduce things to utter simplicity is just not being faithful to the complexity of who we are, because we aren't simple beings. Firstly, if I were to ask you what is the primary motivation of human endeavor, what makes you tick, what do you seek in life, what do you really want, it is called oneg in our tradition. The word oneg commonly translates as pleasure, but we're not talking about the pleasure principle of contemporary Western psychology, although it has some relationship to it. We're talking here about the intense pleasure of oneness. When we say oneness, an example of that is love. 2 people, a man and a woman, merging with mind, with body, with heart, with experience, experiencing that peak experience of oneness, but needing to separate because we can't live in this world, in this time and space with a constant peak experience. So it becomes rhythmic, like this, seeking that oneness and moving away from the oneness, coming together and moving away, etc., etc., whether that be physically, intellectually, emotionally, or otherwise. Never completely separated, but the intensity of it wanes like this. Same with all things in life. Knowledge, trying to understand, trying to learn a subject. You'll find that why do you want to learn a subject? You want to learn something because you want to enter into a state of oneness with it. That's what you ultimately want. You want to know it. To know something, it's got to be you. If you really know it, it's inside you. The example I often give, you've heard me say it, if I ask you what is 7 times 6, and you will say 42, and you'll say 42 unthinkingly. Well, most of you would. Okay? You wouldn't say, 7 4s are 28, add another 7, 35. You might, but then you don't know it. You know how to process to get the answer, but you don't know it. To know it is, it comes out without even processing it. Why? Because to know something is oneness. It is you. It's not separate from you. Maybe you trained your brain to create that oneness by rote learning. And now we're going back to the old-fashioned rote learning, because guess what? It works. You get to know things, etc. But that's the important thing, to create states of oneness. That's called oneg. Now, when we have mundane pleasures, like ice cream or roller coaster or the other things, that can be pleasureful also, because it mimics states of oneness, because of what Chaim said earlier, because you tend to feel alive. And in a world where we tend to be deadened by the life's experience that we live, to feel alive begins to mimic states of oneness. But that's not states of oneness. That's what the Western perception of pleasure is, the pleasure principle there. So this is what we seek in life, oneness through oneg. Okay, step one. Step two. How do you get to states of oneness? You get to states of oneness because you have a desire. You want it. You've experienced it, and if you want it, repeat it. You've had this absolutely wondrous experience, and you want to do it again. So what do? You drive yourself to have it again. I love the company of this person. I really connected. Oneness, connected. I want to see that person often. So I drive myself to get there. That's called ratzon, which interestingly, for those of you who know Hebrew, the word ratzon has the word ratz in it. Ratz means running, movement. And that's what desire is, emotional movement of a high order. So ratzon, desire, strong willpower, is necessary in order for us to achieve oneg, which leads to happiness. But ratzon itself is insufficient, because if you run in the wrong direction, you're not going to get there. If your emotions run in the wrong directions, you're not going to get there. So you need seichel, mind. You need to use intellect. You need to be able to use your compass, mind compass. If I do this, then strategically it's possible for me to drive myself to get to oneg. So everyone understands that. You have to be able to strategize. But strategies alone won't do it, because where comes the fuel? The fuel that drives your strategies comes from midos, or midot, emotion. Emotion becomes the vehicle that drives the strategy and allows us thereby to exercise the willpower to get to the state of oneg. And there's one more step. With all the emotional fuel, that won't get there unless you move your feet and move your hands, the body. In other words, you have to have these 5 steps operating sequentially in order to get to states of pleasure and oneness. And that's where happiness lies, when oneness occurs. The pleasure of oneness produces the experience of happiness. Okay? So I've simplified with a rather complex model that's within the Hasidic teachings that will explain how we have to operate in life in order to move to get there. And obviously it's not just going to happen just instantaneously. You have to be able to move your body well. That requires health. That requires a sense of well-being. That sense means you have to eat correctly. It means you have to think correctly also, because that powerfully affects your body and the like. You have to exercise correctly. Right. We got the body operating optimally. Right. What about emotions? Right emotions from wrong emotions. We do use right and wrong, good and bad. There are right emotions and there are wrong emotions. Wrong emotions take you away from the trajectory towards oneg. Right emotions take you there. A right emotion is one that allows you to connect. A wrong emotion will disconnect. And then you have to have wisdom. If you don't have wisdom, then the emotions won't be able to run in the right direction. And wisdom alone won't propel you. Even with the fuel of emotion, you need to have willpower to be able to get you to ultimately oneg. Okay? Happiness, therefore, is a state, the result of processes. It's a state of being. Probably the singular most active element that produces happiness is what we call chesed, the act of giving. I dare say that if I asked you to recall now again all moments of happiness that you've experienced in the last 3 months, I'd say 90%, if not 100%, related to some act of contribution and giving, whether emotionally or tangibly, to somebody else. We have been programmed to be givers. We learn again in Kabbalah that the world was created with the quality of chesed embedded in it. Everything ultimately works best when it's an act of giving. The soil works best when it's giving to the seed and producing growth. Likewise with all things in life. And since the human being is created in the image of the cosmos, when we are involved in the rhythm of giving, then we are also acting in sync with the intent, of which the ultimate state, again, is happiness, as we've said before. Chesed is the thrust of creation, chesed means connection, and chesed leads to oneness. And now there's a lot of empirical evidence. If you Google happiness, you'll find how many research experiments have been taking place in the last 5 years about charity and giving, and how that affects the quality of the employee's life, and how that affects the quality of every one of our lives. And there's really some tremendous evidence. Who needed it? Well, I guess we did. We know it. But nevertheless, we do have empirical evidence that clearly shows those people who are much more giving individuals experience happiness in a much more profound way and much more often. But let's look at the other side, the flip side of that coin. Sadness, or anxiety, or worry, or depression, God forbid. Depression relates to ego self. Depression, of which the Hebrew word is atzvut, atzvus, is the antithesis of happiness, simcha. And in Jewish spiritual terms, it's an offshoot of ego and idol worship, whether it be the idol of money, the idol of beauty, or whatever the idol is. In other words, when we are full of ourselves, when we are the barometer subjectively of everything, when it is turned inwards, the result is it implodes, and that's called depression. Depression in our tradition is very, very much related to our ego self. Whereas the antidote to that is anivut. Anivut means humility. And happiness is a product of humility, which provides space for the flow of abundance and wide-angle perspective of reality rather than a loaded view. What we're saying is as follows. If ego leads to depression, not the sole cause, but it's one of the precursors to it, then if we can practice ego abnegation, bitul hayesh, as we call it, we should have a good antidote to it. Why? Because if a person is humble, and remember, the Jewish definition of humility is not the same as the Christian definition of humility. Humility in our tradition does not mean turn the other cheek. It does not mean to be this meek individual. Not at all. Because who is the epitome of humility in our tradition? Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, is described in the Torah as being the most humble of all people. Moses, general, chief justice, arbiter of all Jewish disputes. Can you think of a worse job? Strong-minded, seemingly dictatorial individual who leads a rebellious people for 40 years in the wilderness. This is the example of humility. Something's wrong. And that's in our definition of humility. Humility in our tradition means assertiveness. Not control, not domination. Control and domination means insecurity. Only insecure people seek to control or dominate. Secure people don't do that. Okay, it's very important to know that. Assertiveness means that I will nevertheless have absolute confidence in saying what I have to say, saying it to you, saying it strongly because I think it's for your benefit. Control is always for my benefit. Power is for my benefit. So the words might be similar, the tonal quality of the voice may be similar, but it's the kavanah, it's the intention. If I'm saying it because of selflessness, because it's you that I have in mind, then it's assertiveness. And that is anivut. Anivut is to say, I have a gift, I didn't produce it, God gave it to me, and if I have a duty to confer it on somebody else. That's the difference. Whereas, if it is a matter of ego, well, the result is you recognize very soon your limitations. You only practice egotistic behavior because of limitations, insecurities, recognizing your your limitations, and the like. Now, one more interesting point, and that's depression and disappointment. In depression, Atzvut, these are the kind of qualities that we exhibit. People who are depressed have low energy, they're unsociable, and they tend to be listless. They want to lie in bed, under the covers, they don't want to see anybody, they want to be utterly removed, and their energy level's extremely low. Okay? As opposed to disappointment, which we call murirut. Merirut, which comes from the Hebrew word mar, bitter, or maror, which we eat on Pesach, right, for bitter herbs and the like. That's characterized by high energy, involvement socially, and a vitality seeking to rectify. If a person has disappointment, that person should be able to rebound with high energy, getting back into the fray and correcting what took place. However, if they're in a state of depression, they'll never be able to do that. So there's an important distinction. The antidote to all of these is happiness. You can't be happy and depressed at the same time. Just like you can't think of two things at the same time, you can't be happy and depressed at the same time. Every day may not be good, but there is something good in every day. Right, that's a good way to look at it. See if you can make that a fixture in your perception of reality. Finally, a fail-safe mechanism of always being happy. I'm going to give you the secret here very, very straightforwardly, and I guarantee if you practice this, you will be happy. And it's called emunah and bitachon. What does emunah and bitachon translate? Usually in the rather difficult words of faith and trust. But I'm going to give you a working definition of these. Emunah, and bitachon, which are two axiomatic propositions, which I'm going to ask you to accept without any discussion whatsoever, and I'll tell you why in a moment, means as follows. Emunah is the belief that everything that has ever happened to you is for your current good. Everything that's ever happened to you is for your current good. Bitachon is the belief that the challenge you face now will have a positive outcome. The challenge you have now will have a positive outcome. In other words, emunah means from the past to the present, everything that's ever happened to you is for your current good. Bitachon is from the present to the future. The challenge you face now will have a positive outcome. I'm asking you to go through life and accept these two axiomatic propositions, to which you will say to me, but how can I? I simply don't believe it. Am I enunciating some thoughts that you might have? So I'll say to you, it's very, very simple. If you were a betting individual, you would agree with me that it's a 50-50 probability I'm right. All right? And there's a 50-50 probability that if you want to take the negative view, you're right. I can't prove you wrong, and you can't prove me wrong. You don't know that everything that's happened to you isn't for your current good, and you don't know that the challenge that you have now won't have a good outcome. You don't know that as a certainty because you're not a prophet or prophetess And if you are, I apologize. Okay? And you know full well that I'm not a prophet, and if I am, I'm not going to tell you. And therefore, I can't assert with 100% concreteness that I'm right, that your past circumstances is for your current good, and now will work out well. But this I can assert very clearly, and some of you said that at the outset of this lecture. If you follow my axioms, you'll be happy, and if you follow your axioms, you won't be. Simple as that. If you believe that you have been victimized in the past and now you are the result of a victim, you will not be happy. And if you believe that the challenge you face now is a recipe for failure, you won't be happy either. Whereas, if you believe that whatever happened in the past is your current good, you'll be happy. And if you realize that the challenge that you have now will have a positive outcome, you'll be happy. So there's a functional difference between these two, and now I underline the word, beliefs. Don't run away with thoughts that you are rational creatures. We are not rational creatures. We try to pride ourselves in being rational creatures, but I can prove to you that you're not a rational creature. The very fact that you're here in this room is an utter statement of non-rationality. And I'm not demeaning myself. I'm trying to explain what in the following way. I would imagine that all of you, or at least most of you, probably came here by car. Hands up all mechanical engineers who are in the automotive industry in the room. Not one. You mean you got into the car not knowing how the car works, but believed it works well. You also believed that you're quite safe in driving to 226 Hawthorne Road, although you know full well the statistics of carnage on the roads. And on the basis of all that, you came here. You demonstrated extreme belief. Emunah. And we do it in all things in life. We say we have to. I don't care if we have to or don't have to. It just happens to be the truth. You do. So I'm asking you to add another one. Emunah and bitachon. Just add another little belief. Why? Because the result will be positive. And when it says, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, you should serve Hashem with joy. The pathway to that is through emunah and bitachon. And when you can come to me and say, Laibl, I can prove you wrong, then I'll accept. Till then, I advise you to adopt this particular mantra that I'm suggesting. All right? Do I have any contenders here? No? All right. Tracht gut und Welt sein gut, as the Frierdiker Rebbe said. Think positive and the outcomes will be positive. And a later author picked that up with the title of a book, The Power of Positive Thinking. Okay? But that's true. That's all about positive thinking. And that's the field of positive psychology today, which has really adopted a lot of what I just said, not the same terminology. The field of positive psychology says what you do is you focus on the strengths, not the weaknesses. You don't focus on your child's weakness and get him or her lots of tutors to try to overcome the weakness, because what that has the danger in passing is of creating low self-esteem in your child, because you're focusing on the weakness. The better approach, which we're teaching today, is look at your child's gift, and every child possesses gifts, strengthen those, accelerate those, and the weakness will by itself go away without the focus on it. And that's the same in business, it's the same in many arenas of human endeavor. So what are the 5 secrets by way of conclusion? Here you have them on screen. Happiness is a burger. So I expect you all to go down Carlisle Street and be able to buy modest burgers, but very tasteful burgers. Don't deny yourself a burger, but do make sure that you allow yourself the enjoyment of a burger, okay? Don't wait till tomorrow, what you can do today, if it's something which is within the ambit of your joy. Secondly, exercise choice. Choose, I'm going to leave this room and I'm going to choose to be a happy person. And we just said to you, that's very powerful, because you can overcome whatever you can claim to be your early environmental settings and your early genetic implantation from your parents and the like. You can overcome all that through the exercise of choice. Enjoy every day. Every day is a journey. Make sure that you actually enjoy the journey, because the journey doesn't end, and there is not one day that you will finally be happy. Don't think that way. Today, be happy. Oneg, we spoke about that at length, and we noticed that to get to a state of oneg, we need to be able to go through the 5 steps. One day we'll take a Kabbalah course that studies that at greater length. And happiness is faith, emunah, and bitachon. Okay. Now, any final thoughts or questions? Have I really coerced you into submission tonight? Okay.
Just have a question.
One, yes.
When you're saying about think good, it will be good, what's the connection exactly?
Why tracht gut und wird sein good? Why think positive, the outcomes are positive?
Yeah, the connection.
The connection to tonight's session on happiness?
Connection between thinking good and it will be good.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so what does it mean, the connection between think good and therefore it will be good? 2 kinds of connections we can speak of. The first one, through the positive thinking, you actually change the words that you choose to say, change the behavior that you exhibit, and more often than not project, therefore, that kind of an image which makes the other one much more positively disposed to you, so that you actually create a more likelihood of positivity in whatever the relationship is. At a more profound level, when we actually think positive, we actually send waves of consciousness that transcend time and space and change the nature of things, so that the Friedrich Rebbe notes in a work called Likutei Diburim, in the opening pages, that you can project a thought to someone across the other side of the world, and through your thought affect them materially and spiritually. So there's something real by way of consciousness fields that we also affect through our thinking processes.
It's similar to if you smile and then someone else smiles and it's like a whole cycle.
If you smile, the world smiles with you. Absolutely true. Smile. Okay.
Your definition of oneg had 2 parts, but you only focused on the first part.
Probably.
You chose to do that?
No, remind me.
I think the second part was meaning, but
I didn't go into that. Yes, you're right. There is, because I could go in many directions, there are things like superficial emotional experiences that pick you up for a moment, but then they dump you soon afterwards. They're usually meaningless, means they don't have roots. When there is joy that's also underlain by a quality called meaning, which we didn't discuss, you correctly put, and that requires its own discussion, then the alloying of joy and meaning creates lasting happiness. It's got roots. But that requires more discussion. Thank you for reminding me. Was noch? What else? Speak now, forever hold your peace.
Yeah,
Make this the last question then.
I'm just not sure how you change the 40% to 100%.
Easy. Choose it.
With your mind.
But
Just choose it. Just choose it.
choice is 40%.
Choice
So
is...
how choosing it.
Choice is a capacity of 40%. When you exercise the choice, you recharacterize everything in the moment. In other words, you aren't 100% set point genetics, okay? You aren't 100% circumstances. You're only 60% of there. There is a vacuum called 40%. That's to do with choice. It won't do anything for you, however, if you don't exercise it. When you exercise it, you paintbrush the whole lot into 100% according to the way choice. Choice has that power. Genes do not, and neither do circumstances.
So you're saying that if you
Not I said, but that professor says.
that 40%, then you're actually cancelling out the whole 60% and
Yeah.
that's genes and...
Exactly. That's why when you actually, choose to laugh, your whole body will laugh, and in that moment of laughter, a true laughter, you're not going to experience depression, and you're not going to experience a negative thought that assailed you 10 minutes earlier. In that moment, it'll be 100%, and it can be 100% negative also.
She's confused.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. and I look forward to having you in the future again. Have a wonderful time.